Hello, hello. We are going to go ahead pretty soon and be talking about the American Revolution. But before we really get into it, we have to know a little bit about what happened that led us there. And so today we're going to look at three things that happened during the run up to the American Revolution. First thing we're going to talk about is the French and Indian War. Second thing we're going to talk about is debt. And then we're going to finish up talking about everyone's favorite topic, taxes, because nothing says fun like taxation. So let's get started. First of all, there was a 7 years long war that was not shockingly called the 7 Years' War. And it was fought between all those countries on the left and all those countries on the right. For our purposes, here's what matters. Great Britain was basically fighting against everybody else. Yeah, Prussia and Portugal were there, but believe me, they weren't much help. Here's a map of the world at the time. All of the blue countries were fighting with Great Britain. All the green countries were fighting against Great Britain. So when I say it was a world war, I'm not really messing around. This was pretty much everyone. Our part of the world, the part that we're focused on, is right here. That is the part that we now call the French and Indian War, because we have to give everything our own name. So this part of the world was involved with the French and Indian War, and this was the British against, not surprisingly, the French and the Indians. Well, here's one thing that you may or may not know. Wars are really, really expensive. Why? Well, let's see. At the time, you had to buy entire fleets of ships. They had to be sent all the way overseas, and you had to fill them up with soldiers who all had to be paid. Plus, you don't think those fancy red coats and gigantic fur hats are cheap, do you? Because I've been looking for a set of them myself. Pretty pricey. On top of that, you got to get all these guys the right guns, the right ammunition. You got to keep them fed. And I'll tell you, Costco wasn't open yet. Had to buy at retail prices. Not good when you're buying for an entire army. So here's what ended up happening. Britain ended up having to borrow lots and lots of money because that's what governments do when they run out of money. Where do they borrow money from? They borrow from banks, they borrow from wealthy people, they borrow from other countries. Regardless of where they got it from, the problem is they have to pay the money back. That usually does tend to get in the way. And not only that, they had to pay the money back with interest, which is a fee basically that you pay for the pleasure of borrowing the money. So they borrowed, nothing major, just 122 million pounds. Which is not a weight, it's actually the unit of British money. So they borrowed 122 million pounds. That worked out to 4.4 million pounds a year in interest. In money that we understand, that means they borrowed $2.3 trillion and they had an interest payment of $80 billion a year. In other words, they borrowed a heck of a lot of money. So how are they going to pay that back? What now? Come on. You can get there. Come on, make it happen. There we go. Well, when a government needs money, they really only have one way to raise that money, and that is taxes. They can raise taxes. But that leads to the obvious question, which is, what are taxes? Taxes are money that are paid to the government, and we are really, really good at paying taxes in this country because we pay a whole lot of them. Here are four types that you might be at least a little familiar with. One of them is the sales tax. When you go to McDonald's and get something off the dollar menu and end up costing you $1.08, you are paying sales tax. It's a percentage on your purchase that you have to pay on top of the purchasing price. Next up is the income tax, which you're probably not paying yet, but you will, believe me, everyone does. And that is you pay a percentage of your annual income at the end of every year. It's due on April 15th. It's tax day. Lots of fun. Try not to stress out your parents too much on the 14th. Or do. See what happens and let me know. Next up, we have tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imports. So if I buy a car from Japan, that car might be taxed. That car might have a tariff on it when it's imported into the country. It's to help, it's to raise money and to help local businesses. The last kind that we're going to look at is basically what's called fees. That's like when you get married, you have to pay for a marriage license. If you get your driver's license, you have to pay for that. There are just certain fees that you have to pay when you do things as an adult. It's a lot of fun, I swear. So remember the British? We were talking about the British, right? So they owed $2.3 trillion because they had to pay for the French and Indian War, which, as we said, the big coats, the big hats, the ships, the guns, the food, expensive stuff. So they had to pay back $2.3 trillion, which meant it was tax time. So what did they do? Well, they came up with what was called the Stamp Act of 1765. So let's see. It was not a sales tax, nor an income tax, or a tariff. Instead, they went with fees. Da-da-da. So what they did was they decided that they would make the colonists pay taxes, these fees. They would make them pay taxes on all legal procedures and legal documents. And the way that you could prove that you paid the tax was that they would put an official stamp on the document. So if your document had that stamp, you could prove that you paid the tax, that you paid the fee. If you didn't have the stamp, you had no proof because you probably didn't pay the tax. So the problem was the colonists hated this tax. I mean, really, really hated this tax. There were a lot of reasons why. The biggest reason was they had no say in making it. All right, this upset them to no end. So yes, we finally had a tax to help the British pay, but the colonists didn't like it because, well, first of all, no one likes taxes, but most importantly, because they didn't have any say in the matter whatsoever. So, what did we learn? First, we learned that Britain was apparently really, really strong because they took on most of the world's great powers in a world war called the 7 Years' War. Our part of the war was called the French and Indian War. It was between the British and the French and Indians. The British won, the French and the Indians both lost. Okay, however, wars, as we said, are crazy expensive, and Britain borrowed 122 million pounds to pay for it. That's almost $2.5 trillion today. Problem is, you got to pay that money back. Great, so how do governments get money? Well, they raise taxes, which are, of course, money paid into the government. There are 4 types of taxes: sales, income, tariff, and fees. And the British decided with the Stamp Act of 1765, they would go the fees route. So they basically set up a tax on all legal documents and procedures, and the way that you proved you paid the tax was with an official stamp. And the colonists really, really did not like that stamp or that tax. Thank you.